Hello and welcome to the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. We bring you interviews from people who have conquered the trickiest of health challenges using the functional diagnostic nutrition philosophy and similar healing modalities. You're going to hear from experts who have been through the ringer with their health issues and yet managed to come out on the other side. You can always visit us at functionaldiagnosticnutrition.com, but for now, here is today's episode. All right, hello my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast, Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 467 of the Health Detective Podcast. Although our poor guest would not know it, we're having quite a day over here trying to set up for this podcast. I think we are maybe in a bit of bad luck because I'm still doing this remotely from my parents' house since we were visiting for Thanksgiving. I actually will be flying home tonight. It was a whole crazy thing. Maddie, my wife, flew home yesterday. I'm flying home tonight, but I'll be back in the normal studio in Austin for you guys for tomorrow's podcast, episode number 468. Only quick announcement before we get rolling with our guest is HSU this Saturday. That's going to be with Dr. Amy Apigian. And Tracy must have joined us because that did not pop up for me. So Dr. Amy Apigian, she is the author of The Biology of Trauma. She has a new book that just came out as well. And we're going to be discussing some of the work that went into that. If you do not know what an HSU is here at FDN or a Health Space Unmasked event, HSU is basically, it's almost like you got to go to a conference session virtually. And it's only one though, right? It's not like a whole day of conference stuff for free on a Saturday. So the event is 100% free. The replays are free. All you have to do is register, and that can be done at fdntraining.com/HSU. That's fdntraining.com/HSU. Looking forward to talking to Dr. Amy then. And also, once you've done this episode, please make sure you are subscribed to see some of the stuff that we're sending out. We just had an amazing conversation yesterday with a naturopathic doctor who focuses on integrative cancer care. And I am genuinely shocked at this point that how much stuff goes into functional medicine and medicine in general. We are almost 500 episodes in. I'll never forget thinking when we were starting this off, I was like, oh my gosh, Reed, the founder of FDN, might want me to do this for a while. Like, what will I do after 100 episodes? And there's always new things to be learned. And I just learned yesterday about 2 different tests that are already out on the market, already available for purchase, that act as pre-cancer screenings. And one of them, although a little bit pricier, it's based out of Greece, but does ship to the United States as well and other places in the world. It actually shows you which chemotherapy treatments would be best for your specific type of cancer. If, gosh forbid, you were to deal with something like that, what nutritional supplements would be most effective, and also what other medications, non-chemotherapy medications, would be most effective. So please make sure you're subscribed. That's the kind of content that we're putting out, and I'd love for you guys to check it out. Now, because we were a little bit rushed, I did not get to tell our lovely guest the context of why I absolutely love this topic, and I think we're going to have a blast with this one today. So our guest, Moira Newiss, is a BANT, B-A-N-T, registered nutritional therapist, health coach, and accredited ketogenic metabolic therapy expert who specializes in brain energy, a newly recognized root cause of many mental health challenges. She helps clients understand what's happening in their biology and guides them through simple, practical changes that spark real transformation. Her work is grounded in hope, clarity, and the belief that people can not only feel better, but truly get their lives back on track. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I don't want to repeat a story I've repeated a million times here, but just to give you the quick context, when I hear both the ketogenic side and the mental health side, one of the main reasons I got into this space is because I started dealing with, I'm 30 now, I started dealing with mental health challenges at about 5. And this lasted all the way up until almost 21 years old when I went through the FDN program and all this stuff. Now, the FDN program is not against the ketogenic diet. We don't necessarily teach it, though, either. But many of our practitioners, once they graduate, are very interested in the benefits of fasting. They mess around with ketogenic diets and stuff like that. And I've done one for an extended period of time at different periods of my life. And holy cow, your brain feels like it's on fire if you get it right in the best way. It is just like clarity and lightness. It just feels good. Now, I think I pushed it a little bit too far because I didn't think I mineralized properly. And I found that eventually, after a year or two of doing this, I actually started to not feel so great. So we'll maybe get into that today. So I've been a little away from it. And I was just thinking recently, because my mom, when I'm visiting for Thanksgiving, she has a glucometer that also acts as a keto meter. And we're all scanning our stuff. And I was only a zero point 0.1 on my keto meter. And I'm like, holy cow, I remember when I had that at like 2.0. And my record ever was like, I think a 3.2 or 3.6. So really excited to talk with you today. But we are going to start with the same question that we begin with everyone who hops on the show to whom this is relevant to. I would love to know, what did your health challenges look like and symptoms look like? And when exactly did they begin for you?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years as a senior manager in the NHS, the health service in the UK. So my symptoms started while I was training and working as a senior manager, and they really developed over quite a number of years until I got to the point where I developed fatigue, anxiety, depression. To start with, I didn't really acknowledge that there was a problem. I was kind of determined to keep going. I was a bit of a perfectionist. I was juggling a lot of things in life, but it finally got to a point where, if I look back with hindsight now, I can see there was a pattern developing for quite some time. It was like fatigue. I used to run 10 kilometers on a Friday night with friends, and I got to the point where I just couldn't do it physically. I was just going for a walk, for example. My lifestyle at the weekend had changed. I couldn't climb mountains anymore. I was struggling to race my bike, things like that. All the kind of physical signs of energy not being right. Mm-hmm. But at the same time as fatigue, I was developing mental health symptoms, which at the time, I kind of, probably partly due to stigma, kind of tried to park to one side. And I was very focused on the fatigue element, which I understand now that the two are really, really related, that brain energy and physical energy really is the same thing. It's, energy is made in the body the same way. But back then I was kind of focusing on the fatigue, which, to be honest, was probably, the best thing that could have happened to me, because that is how I found the ketogenic diet, which is part of my story. Shall I tell you a bit about that? Is that okay? How I got?
Please do. Yes.
Okay. So I quit my job in the end because I was really not coping at all. Went to the GP, everything looked fine on the blood tests. Nothing was picked up that was problematic. I got offered an antidepressant prescription, but I turned it down because I felt I could maybe try and do something with lifestyle. Didn't quite know what at the beginning. I got referred to a psychiatrist who I only saw once, and who said to me, I think you need to do some deep breathing. And really, I credit him with the start of me thinking maybe I need to use lifestyle medicine to get better. Although I didn't really know what it was back then, but I went away and practiced deep breathing, which, was the start of many other things. Got into nutrition at some point over the next couple of years and became really interested in that. And I realized I'd been surviving on caffeine and chocolate and sugar a lot of the time. I would get to 4 o'clock at work and think, when can I go and get my next boost? Because I'm going to be here till 6 o'clock and I can't keep going without some sugar. So, but then I retrained, decided to do a 3-year diploma in nutrition with the Institute of Optimum Nutrition in London. And in the very first year, I think I was 6 months through or something, there was one module on energy production that talked a little bit about a ketogenic diet. They don't major on it at all, maybe a bit more nowadays, I'm not sure. But back then, it was just mentioned. But I was really fascinated by this concept. So I took a bit of a deep dive off the course into ketogenic therapies, metabolic health, how energy was produced, and tried a ketogenic diet. And for me, everything had got a bit better with all the other things I was doing, cleaning my diet up, stress management, breathing, circadian rhythm management. But it was really the ketogenic diet, like you just said there. When I did it properly, it was like a light came back on and I just felt amazing again. It was like 120% of my energy back. I was racing my bike and climbing the mountains. So that is really what got me to where I am and why I'm so passionate about using it as a tool now for other people to help them recover their energy.
It never gets old to me hearing the process with which people get into this space. Like, I love how deep breathing was kind of your gateway drug, if you will, to the entrance. So it starts with something so simple, then all of a sudden we're on podcasts years later talking about the transformation. And thanks for mentioning in your story that, maybe you were affected by some of the stigma around mental health. I think during COVID, for better or for worse, so much of that stigma did go down only because we couldn't ignore it anymore. But people forget, man, because I didn't even tell you this. I actually speak in schools about mental health to kids. Prior to COVID, it was so rough to talk about these things. And then literally when I started going back in person to schools, once it was like 2021 that I could start going into schools here, I used to have kids messing around the entire time I'm talking about mental health. I could then start going to a class of 500, silence. Like they would just, and that's not a good thing necessarily. I almost liked when they messed around a little bit more. But it's so interesting how something so simple and possibly even natural, I would make that argument, because I think being in a state of ketosis is much more natural than not only Western medicine, but even natural medicine leads people to believe. Not everyone's on board with what you and I talk about here. So I'm excited to kind of make a case for this. So when you started to do this, you said you noticed that you were feeling better, but we also have both mentioned doing it properly. So I believe, and maybe you have a different belief, but I believe what most people do is that they read that the keto diet is this XYZ thing. I'm going to eat this amount of carbs, and they kind of go for it. They feel a little sickly maybe the first few days, and they give up and think it's not for them. I would assume you have a slightly different approach to it. Maybe tracking's involved, but I would like to start with this. Why do you think so many people do have maybe different experiences than us, where they swear they tried this for 3 or 4 days, they felt super sick, and then they kind of gave up on that? Because I'm sure you've heard that before. So why does that happen to people?
I think there's probably a few reasons why it happens. Some of them are social reasons. You know, they just find it really difficult to do it. And so it's kind of easier just to give up in that situation if you've not got family support, or, you know, you don't know how to navigate it at work or anything else. So there's kind of like the social support side of things. Then there's the not getting the macros right. If you're not tracking it or you're not testing, it's hard to know whether you're actually in ketosis. You might feel a bit better just going low carb, for example. You know, lots of people get benefits just going low carb. Are you actually in ketosis? If you're not, then, you know, finding out a little bit more about it can kind of push you in the right direction. So, you know, tracking your macros to make sure you're getting the right ratio of particularly fat to protein and carbohydrates. And testing, you know, when I started out working with ketogenic diets with people, often people didn't want to test. It wasn't as popular. And I'd be trying to persuade them to test, and they'd be like, no, I don't think I'll test, I'll just do it. And then, you know, like a few weeks later, you're having this conversation with them saying, well, you know, how are you feeling? And they're sort of saying, well, I don't feel a lot better, actually. And you're kind of going, well, I don't know if you're in ketosis or not. So nowadays I'm much more strict and say, if you want to do ketogenic diet, do low carb by all means. But if you want to do ketogenic, then really we need to test. So that is one of my kind of bottom lines now is, you know, we test in one way or another. So I think it comes down to those two things. I do think sometimes if people are kind of not fully committing, they're transitioning in and out a bit, that is a difficult place to be. You're kind of in a metabolic hinterland almost, where your body's not sure whether it's dealing with carbs or whether it's dealing with fat. And, you know, if you're not allowing yourself to become fat adapted, you might not feel very good in that situation. So that could be one reason. It could be things like electrolytes. It could be micronutrient deficiency. So I guess at some point you have to start, you know, trying to unpick the jigsaw puzzle if it's not working for you.
There's a lot of places I can go from what you just said. I would want to focus really quick, please, on the electrolyte one, because I think this is where I actually messed up doing it long term. Because when I was measuring on my keto meter, I was truly able to get to a point where 16 hours into my day, I could be at a 2.0. I could be at a 1.5. Like I was deeply in ketosis, and I did not understand what was happening. That would mean that, hey, I might need to take in much more salt and potassium than I typically would. So could we please discuss why electrolytes are so important on the keto diet, especially if you're just starting out?
Yeah.
Like what is happening in the body that means that we need more of that stuff?
Yeah. So when you start dropping the amount of carbohydrates you take in, you also are dropping insulin, which is a hormone that's used to shuttle glucose into the cells if you're eating carbohydrates. When that drops, you start to the body does a few different things that adapts to this new metabolic state. And one of the things is that it reduces the amount of water and salt that it retains. So both are important in terms of when people talk about hydration, you often think water, but actually electrolytes are part of that equation because of the osmotic effect, that salt will go where water goes. So if you start losing water from the body, you also lose salt. So, and this is a topic that it's tricky actually to get it right for some people. And I've had some problems myself on the ketogenic diet with electrolytes. I ended up several years in having severe cramp, and I was like really struggling to work out what was wrong. But I'd transitioned a bit more towards the carnivore end of the spectrum, And I actually felt at that point in time, cutting back the salt worked for me. So that is, and I know there is some evidence out there about that if you think just in terms of evolutionary, what we might have eaten as, hunters and gatherers, we probably weren't adding salt to our food all the time, but we also were ingesting a lot less plant food. So, I think that most people doing a ketogenic diet are going to have to add electrolytes in some form or another, either, salt or electrolyte drops or something like that. Could be magnesium as well as potassium and sodium. And there's also bicarb in there as well. So I often say to people, see how you feel, perhaps add a bit in at the beginning, and then we'll adjust it as we go, based on your symptoms effectively. If you're getting muscle cramps or other symptoms that might suggest, headaches and things, then we try and adjust it. And it is a bit of an experiment. There's no, most people are just going to have to try a few things and see what works for them. I don't know if that was what happened to yourself, Evan, or not.
Yeah, well, no, I'll be very transparent. I wouldn't say I gave up on it. I realized I had kind of pushed maybe a little bit. I reflected is what I'm trying to say. So I had, just like you start dabbling into different things. It might start with something as benign as deep breathing. So I took an honest reflection at myself and what I had done over the last several years at that point. And I was doing intermittent fasting, almost religiously. Never missing a day for probably 7 or 8 years straight. Then intermittent fasting became, all right, lower carb. I became very fascinated with the idea of extended fasts. So I would do 24-hour fasts. I've done multiple 48-hour fasts and a 72-hour fast. I've done one 72-hour fast and one 60-hour fast. This is kind of when things changed for me. I attempted my second ever 72-hour water fast. This was probably 3 years ago now. And I got about 34, 36 hours in. So remember, I'm already experienced in this. Like I kind of know what to expect and what's coming. I got, maybe 34, 36 hours into it. And I felt like hell. It was way worse than I would even feel typically, 3 days in if I was dehydrated. Like sometimes when you just wake up on those extended fasts, if you're not hydrated yet, you don't feel so great. For those that don't know, you get hydrated, you feel a lot better. I'm like, what is going on? Like I'm experienced in this. I know what it is. And I could be wrong. But I came to the conclusion at that time that, all right, maybe my body's asking for something else right now. Cause I had probably been primarily in a ketogenic state for like a year or two at that point. I'm coming off of years of intermittent fasting. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to back away from this for just right now. But now I'm on the flip side of my journey. That's why I was so excited to talk to you today, because I don't know about you. You can just get in habits and get in flow really easily. And then it's like, holy crap, another year passed. So it's probably been 3 years before I have not in the last 3 years ever deliberately set out to do like a 24-hour fast. I certainly have not set out to be in ketosis. Whether or not those things happened indirectly because I was traveling or I didn't know it, I can't answer that. But I'm interested now because now I feel like I've pushed the other side. I've become kind of carb reliant again. You might have caught me smile at you when you said relying on chocolate. I'm like, dang, I do love my dark chocolate. And I feel like I'm relying on that a little bit too much. And thank God for my mom having that scanner here, because I'm someone I need to see the numbers. Even though I could have bet my life that I was not in ketosis, seeing that on that meter and knowing like, wow, I'm like at a 0.1 where I used to walk around at like a 1.5 feeling great. I just want to get back into this and I want to do it properly and make sure I got the electrolyte balance and all that kind of stuff. So no, that was ultimately my experience. But I will say the best I have ever felt as someone who had been sick on and off since 5 years old, the best I had ever felt was when I had the diet side nailed down properly, a good amount of hydration, and I'd sit around, 1.2 to 1.5, roughly speaking, on my ketones. I could get to a point, maybe you're the same. I could almost guess like the range that I was in on the keto meter just by how I felt. Is that, I don't know if that's unique to me, or have you gotten there?
Yeah, no, I'm the same. If I have most of the time I feel great, but we all get occasional off days. And if I feel off and I kind of think, oh, my mood doesn't feel quite right, then I might think, okay, maybe my ketones are a bit low and I'll check. And sometimes they don't have to be much lower than 1.01. And I can notice a difference. But because I'm so experienced now, if I check it in, first thing in the morning and they're below 1, I can have them up to 2 by lunchtime.
Nice.
So, which is pretty good because that, most people will be fiddling around a bit longer. So I'm quite lucky that way. And yeah, it's just like, get that switch again back on, by the time. And I don't do a lot of long-term fasting, but I will do, extended overnight fasts, but, sometimes, up to lunchtime the next day or a bit longer. I find when I'm working, it's a bit harder. There's something that drives me back to wanting to eat when I'm working, maybe a little bit of stress. But at the weekend, if I'm out, exercising or gardening or something, I can just go a lot longer. I don't even think about food. But just one interesting point on the salt thing as well is that there are some studies showing that people sweat salt out in different levels. So some people don't actually sweat a lot of salt at all, and other people do. So if you're, somebody that does a lot of exercise or you live somewhere hot, you might have a different, requirement for salt and electrolytes again.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm gonna have to look into that afterwards. So I want to move this a little bit into the mental health side of thing and the benefits for that, because I am so passionate about this. And I mean, I don't want to get into too much today, and at least personally, but it drives me insane to some degree to know that, like, my depression at one point, for example, got pretty bad. You have to be careful what you say with YouTube sometimes, but I've had thoughts of self-harm, right? And then I don't have that anymore, but it's not like I went to therapy for 10 years. Nothing wrong with that, by the way, if that's what works. I don't care what works for you guys. If you feel better mentally, I'm all for whatever you're doing as long as it's legal. And long-term beneficial. So for me, though, I'm saying I didn't need the medication. I didn't need the therapy. By changing my lifestyle, that went away. And more, I always think about, I'm like, how many people, let alone how many kids, are dealing with something like I dealt with, and they have no idea that this could be metabolic dysfunction, or, I've seen gluten sensitivities or dairy sensitivities in a lot of people on testing, and we change up their diet, bam, they're feeling mentally better in like 5 to 7 days. It's crazy. So let's talk about why does the ketogenic diet offer mental health benefits to some people? Because that might be a new concept even in the functional practitioners that listen to the show. I know it was surprising to me how good I felt, but it obviously helped you as well. So is there any science behind why that's happening?
Yeah, there's lots of science, which is good. So first of all, there is science about how we make ATP, which is really the molecule that provides the energy substrate for most of the biochemical reactions in the body. So we can make ATP in a number of different ways, using carbohydrates, using fat, and some other fuels. But if we start to drop our carbohydrates low enough and increase our fat high enough, then in the liver, in our cells, we have little mitochondria, which are little organelles that actually can put the substrates through a complicated process, but at the end you get ATP out. So it goes through something called the electron transport chain. And they produce ketones and then they go into the bloodstream and travel around to all the tissues and cells in the body, and then they can be burnt as a fuel themselves. So we can fuel the body on ketones. And ketones are fantastic in a number of ways. Firstly, they are produced, they burn with less oxygen. So they're a bit more energetically efficient. Secondly, they're very anti-inflammatory. And third, from a metabolic health point of view, which probably I should have mentioned first, but if you have any amount of insulin resistance in the body, meaning that you're struggling to use glucose as a fuel, then you're bypassing that problem. Ketones do have other benefits. They can actually be supportive in helping the plasticity of the brain, and there is some evidence, that actually they're supporting neurotransmission and synapse connections and things like that, which gets a bit more into the depth of it all. But there's the answer is there's quite a lot of reasons actually why this might work for mental health.
It's so cool. I did a presentation for FDN one time, Maura, and it was talking. There's a meta-analysis, which you might be familiar with, that actually shows, and I'm not promoting these things, hear me out on it. It actually shows that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, naproxen, stuff like that could provide temporary benefits to those suffering with anxiety and depression. And one would sit there and wonder, wait, that's weird. Why would those things help? And they also looked at curcumin from turmeric and omega-3s. Now, all of those things have one thing in common, at least in this case, they're all anti-inflammatory. So I went on to look it up, and man, I'm going to date myself in the sense that it's been a few years since I looked into this. what's the one? Beta hydroxybutyrate? Is that one of the ketones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one in blood.
Yes. So we know that when we have higher levels of that, it is, like you said, anti-inflammatory and can provide some mental health relief in terms of symptoms for people. So I'm like, the narrative still to this day is that it's only a serotonin issue and that you need to take a medication for the serotonin. Now, again, by the way, a lot of my functional friends don't like me saying this. I don't care if you take that first of all, I'm not your doctor. Second of all, I want you to feel better. So if that's something that helps you feel better while you're figuring out the natural stuff, all power to you. I really could not care less. I just want people to feel well. I want them to be here and not be depressed and anxious. That's what I care about most. Yeah. But when you see this stuff that kind of goes against that narrative, and it almost seems like the modern mental health epidemic, possibly for people like you and I, is inflammatory or inflammation driven as opposed to a serotonin deficiency, or maybe something we don't understand yet is that when the brain is inflamed, it produces less serotonin. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know if you've looked into that, but I find it so interesting that something kind of straightforward and simple could provide such relief for people that are suffering quite greatly with their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of studies out there looking at what they'll call peripheral inflammatory markers. So things like CRP, for example, that show if you do a Google search for CRP in a mental health condition, you will find studies that show there is an inflammatory link there, and that, the inflammation maybe can't always be measured directly in the brain, but it's given an indication that there's an inflammatory state in the body, which is probably affecting the brain too. So there's that side of things. We know that ketones they have an anti-inflammatory effect in more than one way, actually. So they can have a direct signaling effect on inflammation, something called the inflammasome. They can dampen that down. That's a kind of pathway in the body that kind of promotes inflammation, and they also can help reduce oxidative stress. Which can in turn, cause tissue damage and inflammation. So there's a few different ways. There are also links, as soon as you start talking about inflammation, you're talking about the immune system being activated too. And there are, again, studies that will link, immune activation to mental illness. For example, there are cases where people have developed things like schizophrenia after infections. So there are other reasons why inflammation can be a problem that contributes to mental illness.
I'm going to transition us a little bit again here, because this is one thing that I really love that you said in the very beginning. You talked about how you're a runner. I think you even mentioned hiking mountains and stuff, and that you stopped being able to do that effectively, but then being in ketosis allowed you to get back to that. Now, this is the exact opposite of what we get told. When we're told how to work out when we're younger or how to go on a run, even like if you go to a bike shop, they sell those little cubes that are just sugar cubes that they eat, or the little gelatin things, while they're biking. And yet, just like you, I had also found I could not believe the feats that I could do while in ketosis. And again, maybe this was pushing it. I'm not advocating for this per se, but I hiked the highest point in Vermont, the state of Vermont in the United States, 22 hours, fasted at the time, but I felt amazing. Like my buddy and I were like competing with who could get up faster. Probably should have had some more electrolytes. I will stand by that. But that is completely not what you should be able to do, but this helped you as well.
Yeah. And, I can actually tell you the moment that I knew I'd kind of cured myself, which is that I decided 3 months after completely committing to be in ketosis properly, I decided to do a 100-kilometer bike event round. It's called the Loch Ness ETAP. Loch Ness is a big loch in Scotland. It's, got quite a big hill halfway around the route called the King something. Can't remember what it's called. But so I decided I would do this. And I was a bit nervous because, I'd done 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, maybe 40, 50, but I'd never done the 100 kilometers, especially not in ketosis, especially having recovered from chronic fatigue and mental illness. So, we set out in the morning. It was quite early. The roads are shut for the event. And I did take a couple of things with me, keto snacks, partly just because I had this little voice at the back of my head going, oh, you might need them. And I did eat one or two things, but I never felt hungry the entire way around. And as I came across the finishing line, I was in tears because I just knew that I'd cracked it. There was just no doubt in my mind at that point. That is the moment that I knew I'd completely recovered. And everybody else is stopping at all the cake stations and chugging down like loads of sugar. And I'm like, don't need any of it.
Did you have pretty stable energy throughout the whole time?
Yeah, absolutely stable. Yeah.
That's one other thing I wanted to say too, just so people that have not given this a try. I mean, I don't know who it's going to be, but I pretty much can guarantee we're going to inspire at least a handful of people today to try this. So, um, has it been your case or in your experience, I'm sorry, that like with the races or strength training, whatever it might be, I have found that like when you do the carb loading, it's almost like you get like a massive, almost jittery burst and then a crash. Whereas ketosis is amazing because I've always found it's almost like my body's producing this steady amount of energy that I need to get through this. So has that generally been your experience doing the
Yeah,
biking and all that stuff?
absolutely. I mean, I train fasted every time, and most of the advice you get, particularly for women, is to not train fasted. And I kind of say, well, why not? Because I feel great on it. So I go to the gym and lift weights for an hour and a half twice a week in the morning, first thing, and then at least one time after that, I'll go for a 5K run. I might get some shopping, go home, get a shower, and then eat. So there's just, and I don't feel hungry even at that point. I do eat because I know I need to eat, but it's not, the energy doesn't drop, and there's actually enough fat even on a lean athlete to run at least a marathon. There's a misperception about how much fat we need, to be able to burn through. Yes, obviously we don't want to do that every day or anything. We want to look after ourselves and feed ourselves properly, but we do have this huge inbuilt resource of fuel that's there to tide us over. If we were a hunter and gatherer and we hadn't eaten for 2 days, we'd have to go and chase, some prey down. We'd have to run in a ketotic state using ketones as our fuel. Otherwise, we would have died out.
Yeah, you brought that up earlier, which by the way, I thought this was a great argument because I've always wondered the same thing. You said from an evolutionary perspective, how would we have been putting salt on everything? Totally agree with that. Probably a lot of our stuff would have had more minerals in it just because it grew in the soil, but totally fair point. To the same kind of thought process there, I think what people don't understand because they're not really thinking it through is like, how would you and I have even made it here today if our ancestors had not been able to survive through some level of famine or some level of not having 24/7 access to food? That is a very unique and modern thing. So even if some humans were supposed to get food 24/7, I don't mean this so brutally, but unfortunately, they probably would have never made it. That gene pool would have never made it to this time frame because no human beings in history have ever had access to food all the time, except certain pockets of modern humans today. And let's be real, that's not even true for every human on this earth today, unfortunately. It's not like everyone even has access all the time. So what I've heard it worded as, and I'd like to know what you think about this, it's almost as if because some people think that like, oh, I could never go without food, right? So what I'm thinking is happening and what I've heard is happening is it's almost like ketosis is this metabolic switch. And if you have never really activated it since you were a kid, it's almost that we have to retrain the body. Now, I don't know if there's any science behind that, but I do think it's an overall accurate statement just from what I've seen anecdotally. What do you think about that or know about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. So if you just take an example of somebody who's eating a high carb diet and they don't eat for a few hours, they'll probably get symptoms of low blood sugar. They'll be shaky. They might not feel so great. They might even feel faint or something. And that's because they can't tap into their fat reserve easily because they're not able to transition easily. They don't have any metabolic flexibility to transition from burning carbs to fat. So what you need to do, and that's why if you want to try a ketogenic diet, actually, if you're eating a high carb diet at the minute, you'd be better to transition a bit more slowly. You'd be better to go low carb, and start to adjust your body a bit before you give it a big shock. Because the people who get the most symptoms when they transition, something called keto flu, even though it's not really a flu, it's just a transitionary state, get it when they go from a high carb to a ketogenic diet straight away. So they're better to transition through. And you're quite right, it is training your body. And, it can take, there are some suggestions it can take up to 6 months to completely train your body to be fully fat adapted. So, for example, if you're an athlete and you want to do this, you want to do it in the off season. You don't want to do it before a race because it will adversely affect your performance to begin with until you become more adapted.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because even to be clear, you did say it was 3 months of fully committing to it before you even tried the race. And it did work for you, thankfully. But
and I had experimented a bit beforehand, on and off a bit. So
okay. So I wanted to ask, and I understand that the schedule is probably going to be a little bit different with everyone. So guys, of course, none of what we talk about on the show is medical advice. I'm just asking her opinion here. So generally speaking, if you're trying to take a standard person into ketosis, maybe they're interested in this for the first time. I know UK is probably a little bit better than America, but it's not too far behind. I mean, we got people here, my friend, that are eating 400 grams of carbs in a day, very often without any physical activity. So I could be wrong, but I'd assume that your recommendation to someone, let's use the number 300. Let's say that 300 grams of carbs per day, not even very physically active. I'm assuming that your recommendation to them would not be to drop to 20 carbs the next day. So how do we take someone like that and transition them as gently as possible and as safely as possible into ketosis? How long does it typically take?
So the answer is you can do it quite quickly, but you might not want to do it as quickly as that because it might be an easier transition, to do it a little bit slower. If somebody's eating that many carbs, I'd probably suggest they go low carb. Low carb might mean less than 150 grams for some people. I would say low carb is less than 100 grams. So you want to be getting down below the 100 gram mark at least. And then, dropping it a bit further. To get into ketosis, initially, you're going to have to be under 20 grams of carbohydrates. And depending on the style of keto that you do, if you're more on the carnivore extreme, then you have to be a bit careful about the protein intake too, because protein does affect ketosis if you have too much protein. So we have to sometimes look at protein too, depending on what the person's eating. So yes, slow transition, get rid of all the ultra processed food is the first step. So, if you're buying lots of stuff that comes in a package that would sit on the shelf for 3 years, probably a good idea to get rid of that first. I say to people, have a look in your cupboard, start getting rid of that stuff, give it to friends, donate it, put it in the bin if you have to, but just get rid of that stuff. So it's not there to cause temptation, because temptations are often one of the problems at the beginning, is that it's easy to break. It's harder in the first couple of days. So you just don't want temptation in sight, really. So pick a day that's a good day. Don't do it when you're going to be out all day and you've not really thought through your food. Maybe you start at the weekend when you're going to be at home for 2 days or something. And that's the way to start, is just to slowly transition people. And then once you get to the point where you're trying to actually do a ketogenic diet, you want to start testing ketones, because at that point you want to do it as quickly as you can to get the benefits as quickly. Some people get benefits amazingly quickly. They can almost feel getting into ketosis. For other people, it does take longer. So for some people, it will take, weeks or even months in some situations. There are case reports where it can take months before people get benefits. It does depend on other things like, exercise, stress does have an impact on blood glucose levels, for example, medication as well. There are some medications that are more likely to make you insulin resistant and make ketosis a little bit more difficult. I tend to tell people that in the beginning to avoid intensive exercise while they transition into ketosis, because it can make it a bit harder to work out what's happening otherwise, because when you do intensive exercise, you will raise blood glucose and drop your ketones. And it's, so it's easier to kind of manage the transition if you just keep, walk or do something a little bit, gentler through the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was only laughing because it instantly made me think of my buddy who, he's a smart guy, but he's not as into health as I am. So he would kind of like follow along to whatever I was doing. He must have tried a keto thing for like 36 hours, my friend. Like he's very extreme. So he went from normal American diet to like less than 20 grams of carbs. He went to the gym and he calls me. He's like, dude, I threw up. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're not supposed to go necessarily do it like that. And of course, I think, jokes aside, that's what does happen to a lot of people. And then they think, oh, keto doesn't work. And I'm like, well, if it doesn't work, I don't think you'd be here. Because again, your ancestors would have had to have gotten into this. Babies can get into ketosis a lot easier than adults. So trust me, you can do it. It's just that it's not working well for you for the way you're trying right now.
And babies are born in a state of ketosis, actually, which is really interesting, because mother's milk contains a lot of medium chain triglycerides, which are really ketogenic. And actually, we know that breastfed children under the age of 2, if they're still mainly breastfed, will often be in a state of ketosis still. So that's quite interesting. So we're born in this state. The other thing I would just mention is that thyroid can be an issue. If you have poor thyroid function, you do need good thyroid function to burn ketones effectively. So that can be something to look out for, that if thyroid's not working well, then you probably won't be able to feel good. You will feel probably, more like you're running on adrenaline almost, rather than burning ketones effectively with thyroid, because thyroid is a master controller of metabolism. And actually, interestingly enough, just talking about thyroid, mental health symptoms can come purely from poor thyroid function as well. So it's often something to get, it's something I will check with clients to make sure that we're not missing something at the beginning.
I wanted to ask you kind of your personal routine with this now. So again, guys, we're not saying this is going to be for you per se, but I'd like to know what you do, because when generally when I talk to someone who's been doing keto long term, normally they have some breaks, or maybe they have a day where they do stuff. I don't know if that's true for you. So I'd love to know more about like what an average week looks like. Do you actually eat basically no carbs? Do you have days where you do a refeed almost? What does your weekly schedule look like now?
Yeah, so I basically eat no carbs, and I have done for 7 years.
Wow.
Apart from maybe when I've been out and somebody's fed me something that I didn't know had carbs in it, the odd time where, planning's gone out the window because it wasn't under my control, like traveling, I ate something by mistake. But pretty much the rest of the time, and that might just be a few days over 7 years, yeah, I'm just ketogenic. So, I generally eat 3 meals a day. You don't have to, but I find it suits me. I quite often have a smaller lunch. So I have a cooked breakfast, like more a traditional Scottish cooked breakfast. So the only thing I have with carbs in it there is a little bit of black pudding, which has a little bit of gluten-free oats in it, but it's not very much at all. I'll have some good quality bacon. I'll have eggs, maybe some avocado. Sometimes I might have some halloumi cheese, and I'll cook it in beef dripping and pour the rest of the dripping on the plate. So I eat the dripping too. Other days, I will experiment and have other things. So sometimes I'll make macadamia nut pancakes with egg yolks, ground macadamia nut, and coconut oil with, some berries and maybe some cream or coconut yogurt with it. Most of the time in the evening, it's meat with vegetables and some kind of extra fat. So tonight we're having roast chicken, with vegetables, but I will be having extra fat on my plate. I'll make a very fat kind of dripping sauce to have, but I might have a cheese sauce another night or a cream sauce another night. So I don't exclude dairy. I did for quite a long time, but I'm finding that I've got it back in now without a problem. So
okay, and I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I want to get clarity on this because I think this is interesting. Because you don't even have like one day a month where you're like, all right, I'm going to go have a big carb meal. You just have done this for 7 years, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I will eat a little bit of dark chocolate, but I still stay in ketosis. It's not, it's not enough. It'll be 85% or 90%, and it won't knock me out. So, okay. I just feel better in it, so I stay in it.
No, I got you. That makes sense to me. I've heard. Again, I don't think the truth of the matter is we haven't studied some of that kind of stuff long term. Like, who the heck knows what it's like if someone's in ketosis for 20 years? It could be amazing. I know this for a fact. I would much rather personally be in long term ketosis than mess around with long term, whatever the heck we call the standard American way of doing things nowadays, insulin resistance, I think we call it. But I have had a friend, pose a reasonable question. I think it's reasonable, at least, would our ancestors have been totally in ketosis forever, or would they have at least some bursts, maybe even one meal? I'm like, well, I could buy into that. I'm referring to my buddy Ben Azadi. You might have seen his brand Keto Camp and stuff. I think he goes by Metabolic Freedom now. But, Ben has like one day a week, basically, where he can do whatever he wants. I think he also incorporates, though, a day of 24-hour fasting. So there's kind of probably a balance there. I was curious.
I have clients that will cycle in and out of ketosis as well. And I think from an evolutionary standpoint of view, we wouldn't have been in ketosis 100% of the time. I think, where I live in the UK, it's a bit further north. If we look back to after the last ice age, what humans were doing here, I suspect 9 months of the year, they might have been in ketosis because there isn't much plant food to eat, to be honest. It's seafood, it's meat, eggs, maybe a few nuts, at certain times of the year, berries, and a few bits of greenery. That would be it. So yes, they probably gorged on berries when they were available, just like bears do as well, any animal in the wild. And that would have set us up for winter, though. We would have put weight on for winter, and it would have given us maybe a temporary period of insulin resistance. But by the time we got back to spring, we'd have burnt off that fat and we'd have got back to a normal state again. So I think we probably had a seasonal variation in this, but not the kind of constant chronic insulin resistant state that we've now got with metabolic health in general.
I love that you brought that up because I never really know. Everyone kind of has, again, you could you could talk about the keto diet with a million different people, but they kind of have their different sub beliefs with it. I like that you mentioned not only the seasonality, but the geography behind it, because, one of the things we learn about in FDN is Weston A. Price. And you see the Inuits in Nunavut, Canada, were eating like 90% whale, seal, blubber, all this stuff, and they were living a long time. And then you have, people kind of closer to the equator that were eating large amounts actually of carbohydrates, and they were also living a long time. So it sounds like not only are you the belief of the seasonal side of things, but would you personally believe that, hey, if I live in Costa Rica and I'm actually getting outside. So by the way, guys, you can't just go to that place and turn on your air conditioning or heat. You actually have to go experience the environment. But are you of the belief then, if I'm like outside in hot sun, strong UV all the time versus you and I, maybe a little bit farther north, very dark winters, very cold. Do you think that person around the equator can maybe get away with a little bit more carbohydrates versus the person in the north, like you and I? At least I'm in the north right now. I live in Austin, Texas nowadays. But do you think maybe, it matters?
I think I'm a bit fascinated by that question because there isn't really a proper scientific answer to it. Like, we don't really know. But what I would think is that if we go back in time, probably quite a long time, because I think humans have altered even remote forestries in places like South America, just over generations, things have changed. So, probably the fruit that there is now in some of these forests wouldn't have been the same that it would be like going back in time. For example, we know that there's some evidence that might have changed. So, and I think they probably still might have been in ketosis at times because they might have fasted either for religious, spiritual reasons, or, illness, or, a variety of different things. So I think that might have happened. They might have done sea crossings where they had no food for a while, things like that. So, but I agree with you. They are more likely not to have been in ketosis as much. And I think there might be other reasons for that, just like, sunlight has a metabolic health effect on the body, which is pretty unknown about. So there are things like that I think, vitamin D levels, there's other things that might play a role, when we look at that too. Yeah, sorry, I've probably forgotten the end of the question, Evan.
No. I'm having so much fun. It's like I'm like looking at my time and I'm like, holy cow, I got to get to my next thing here. But to your point, though, just for those that might not know what you were referring to, and I'm sure it's even more than this, but we do know now, guys, UV light makes you more insulin sensitive, which is it's so crazy to read on paper because it's like nature's perfect in its own way if you actually engage with it. So it's like, oh, why would we as a human be more insulin sensitive with strong UV light? Because you know what else happens in strong UV light? Crops can grow. And then if, I don't have strong UV light, it's probably because I'm too far north or too far south. And my body might need to do something a little bit different. It's endlessly fascinating to me how perfectly we fit into this world, assuming we actually engage with it and don't live under artificial light and air conditioning and heat.
And just one other thing is, I don't think we have to go back very long in history to find people that lived very basic lives. So my father grew up in a very remote place in Norway. They went back after the war because Norway was occupied. So my grandfather was over here during the war. They went back after the war. And my grandmother, who was a vegetarian at the time, had to become almost like a carnivore overnight because where they lived, the only foods they survived on through winter was dried meat, dried fish, and fat. That's my father's generation.
Yeah, good point.
It's not very long back in time where we just didn't have this access to all this, carbohydrate-rich foods.
Yeah, great. Such a good point. I'm going back just a couple of minutes because I really wanted to emphasize something that you said as well. You talked about how it's almost like a bear in hibernation. We would probably get more food to put on some weight before the winter. And I'm laughing because this is the exact opposite of what Instagram teaches us to do. What does everyone do? They bulk up in winter as bodybuilders, right? And then they get lean for summer. And I'm not saying we wouldn't have had lean people in summer. I get that. But it's kind of hilarious because the way that the body's designed, to your point, is probably to put on a little more weight in the summer and fall so we can eat less in the winter. But I think the bodybuilder types do the exact opposite of that. So kind of interesting. Just wanted to point that out. We'll do our kind of final transition here. I'd love to talk more about you and your business. So you obviously help people now in one way or another. So I always like it to be crystal clear for our audience because there's always someone that's looking for you. They just don't know it yet. So who is your typical client and who is the person that like you love to work with? Maybe if they have these characteristics or these problems, you're like, oh yes, I can definitely help them.
So most people come to me who have chronic fatigue and or a mental health condition. So it's either mental health or chronic fatigue or both because, like myself, they often go hand in hand. So people are coming to me with, low mood depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So I do work with serious mental illness as well as mild to moderate. And I do work with, the chronic fatigue spectrum of, fully blown chronic fatigue syndrome as well. So that's why people are coming to me, and they have usually know that I do ketogenic work. Not 100%. Some people come and want to do low carb, but most people are coming because they either would like to try a ketogenic diet because they've heard about the benefits, or they're struggling. They're trying keto, but they're not getting the results they want. So those are the kind of two main reasons that people come to me. And so I'm known as the brain energy expert because I really focus on brain energy now as the main thing. And my focus is on getting energy to work, whether it's in the brain or the body, really. So, yeah.
Another question that I always ask just about your personal business is, or about people's personal businesses when they're on, is that I understand that there is a privacy that we have to maintain with our clients. So I'm only asking this to the degree that you're able to share. Are there any amazing like client testimonials or transformations that come to your mind, like that just really stick out to you, something that you're super proud of or happy about? Like this person came to you not having any idea what's going on. Maybe they're even at the end of their rope. And because of working with you, they were finally able to feel better. Are there any stories like that?
Yeah, I've got two really good ones. One is actually published as a case study, so people can go and read it if they'd like to. It's of complete remission of schizophrenia using a carnivore ketogenic diet. And this is a guy who had been hospitalized, was homeless, had been sectioned, and had stumbled across the ketogenic diet in a book written by Tim Ferriss, who is a kind of self-help guru. It had a section in it, very small section about ketogenic diets. He kind of tried it a bit himself. But he'd had lots of cheat days, and on these cheat days he was eating lots of sugar and feeling really bad, so it wasn't really working for him. But anyway, when he was finally discharged, I did some work with him with a very basic diet because he didn't have a lot of money, so it was very basic. It was basically ground beef mince, high fat, and beef tallow, pretty much was what he did it on. And he had complete remission of schizophrenia and came off his community treatment order and things like that. So that's one brilliant one. I've got another one in the process of being published, which is about anxiety. It's actually a case looking at binge eating, anxiety, and severe gastro reflux, all of which were improved with a ketogenic diet. And this was somebody who had actually suffered with anxiety for quite a long time, like from childhood, and who worked in the research space for contemplative medicine, so like meditation and things like that, but still struggled, despite all the knowledge about meditation and things, still struggled with severe anxiety. So they're two really nice stories, which both people would say was absolutely life-changing for them.
Oh man, dude, that is you're making me smile so big right now. The people that are eventually listening on audio, I don't know if you could hear the smile through the thing, but the reason why is you don't even realize this. I've been looking for a story like this forever. In a few cases, bipolar, schizophrenia, things like that, because, and I'm sure you're the same way. You don't want to go into this space overly confident or even arrogant and be like, all right, listen, these severe mental health issues, because schizophrenia is not a joke. And again, like you said, he was discharged because he was enrolled in something, right? Like he had to actually be involved in something. I mean, schizophrenia can be a serious thing, guys. And to know that this person had remission of this, that's amazing to me. I personally don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion. I have no idea if that's possible for every single case. We have had one person on in the last year who had healed their bipolar disorder. I don't know if that's possible for every case, but to even hear these things, I'll tell you this, Western medicine has 0 cases where something like that is going into remission. I mean, normally these people are on treatment for the rest of their life. That's absolutely incredible. Where can people find the case study? The same place that they can find you or your website?
It is on my website. I do have a list on there of publications, but also if you just Google my name and PubMed, you will find it quite easily because I'm the only Moira Newiss in the world, luckily for me. So yeah, you'll find it there. And you're right, these are, I mean, I wanted to publish these cases because they are so amazing. And, you know, I really feel it gives hope to people that maybe haven't got a lot of hope because they've tried quite a lot of treatments for mental illness and the traditional things just haven't worked. And that is, some people do kind of feel stuck in the system, really. And I want to offer them some hope that, you know, this might be, you know, we can't give guarantees. It probably isn't going to work for everybody, but, you know, it offers hope that there might be a new way forward.
Okay, you just keep amazing me, because when you said publish, I'm thinking in my head like, oh, like it's on her website or whatever. Like the fact that it's on PubMed, I mean, holy cow, so cool. You have at least one other person now that will be constantly referencing that for you, because I've been waiting for years to see could someone pull this off in some way. Totally unexpected. So how so cool. All right, just so we can get it out loud on the audio people, or for the audio people as well, when they eventually listen to this, where is everywhere that they can find you if they'd like to follow you or work with you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is my name. It's moiranewiss.co.uk. And I'm basically my name. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn for that matter as well, because yeah, I just use my name for most of that. So you'll be able to find me quite easily on there. And please come and follow me. And hopefully I'm sharing useful information that, you know, will be helpful and hopefully a bit inspiring.
Yes. Guys, if you enjoyed this today and you are live with us, because I see quite a few of you on, I'm sorry that I didn't ask the audience directly for questions, but that's the privilege of being the host, man. Sometimes I just want to steal the guests, the questions to the guests. So if you could at least drop a thank you if you got something from today, that would be greatly appreciated. And our signature and final question for you today, and it might be an obvious one. Sometimes people surprise me, so I always ask it regardless of what I think it's going to be. The question is just this. If we could give you a magic wand and you could get people to do only one thing for their health, what is that one thing that you would get them to do?
For me, it's got to be about food. So it's got to be about cleaning. I would say cleaning up your diet from all the ultra-processed food is absolutely the first step. Eat real food. You know, don't be afraid of fat. And one of my favorite sayings is that food can be a powerful medicine, but also a slow poison. So be careful what you eat.
Thank you so much, seriously, for coming on today and just for your work and what you're doing. This is awesome.
Great. It was a pleasure. It was lovely talking.